Texas Boxing Scene is honored to have on Cutman, trainer extraordinaire, mainstay in boxing. You've seen him in O'Shaquie Foster's corner, Regis Prograis' corner. He's worked with world champions, national champions, Olympians. Man needs no introduction anywhere in the boxing world. Arron Navarro, it's an honor and a privilege to have you on. How's it going today?
Going good, man. And first of all, thank you for the introduction. And likewise, great pleasure to be on here talking to you.
It's like I said, I've gotten to know you over the last couple of years. It's been an honor. It's a pleasure to have you on. I want you just to start. Obviously, you've been involved in professional boxing for 25 years. But just start, how did you get involved in boxing and how did you get introduced to the sport and talk a little about, your amateur career and your coming up in the sport.
Listen, I'd like a lot of kids. I mean, I got introduced to boxing. My grandfather was a fighter back in the 30s and 40s, and a lot of other fighters in the family. And me and a couple of my younger cousins, we're little kids always fighting anyways. So I guess they figured, the best thing to do was, try to get us in a boxing gym and get us going down the right route in that way. And so, that was my first introduction to boxing as a young kid, and kind of took it from there. Had amateur fights and things like that, and then I was lucky. Later in life, I had some different bumps in the road along the way, like a lot of young guys do, but got into it on the second half of that, working under my coach, Walt Haley. He was when he passed away a couple of years ago, if he wasn't 90, he was close to it. Another guy, like you say, is a, mainstay of, I think, anybody who's around, especially Texas boxing, would definitely knew Walt. He was a great coach, a great mentor for me, and where I got a lot of my foundation from as far as, working with fighters and things along that lines. I think he had his first fight in 1949 and started training guys in 65. So if that gives you an idea of the school that, that we came out of, where we're coming from.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, right? Because I got, involved in boxing, and I knew right away, okay, I'm not going to be a world champion. I'm not going to have a professional career like that, but I got to be involved in the sport one way or the other. Did you know, I need to stay involved. Boxing needs to be a part of my life for the rest of my life. Did you know, I need to be in this field?
Yeah, I think all of us, we're all tied into one thing for sure, which is love for the game, love for the sport. We're all going to have different hats that we wear, and it's like same thing. Listen, I enjoyed training, I enjoyed sparring, enjoyed fighting, but and I ended up getting an eye injury that would send me back. But that being said, I'm not going to lie to you, I was going to be the next Oscar De La Hoya, the next Canelo. Things worked out in a much better, way in the long run with that than they would have, fighting career. I ended up, we've had some, like you said, and there's some world champions, Olympians, Olympic alternates, national champions, things like that, that I was able to achieve a high level in that,
And you have, and I want to get into that. You're working side by side with one of the best trainers in the world now, one of the best camps in the world, Bobby Benton, Main Street Gym in Houston on Main Street. Really one of the best gyms in the world right now. And Houston has become the hot spot for boxing and sparring and training camps in the country. Talk a little bit how you got started in training and working as a cutman. How did you get your start in those?
Well, like I said, first of all, like you said, you mentioned Bob, man, and, he's my partner in a lot of, the majority of what we do. He's my brother from another mother. I've known him for, close to 30 years, him and Ed Jack, who's another great guy down here. He's strength and conditioning guy and a boxing guy, for, I don't know, probably 30 plus world champions. So all of us go way back, and it's a great gym. It's always, that being said too, and I know, listen, we're coming, like Houston's, when I was at Shock's last fight, when we were in San Antonio and he fought Ray Vargas, I had a lot of the PBC guys and other guys from other places say, man, Texas is, and especially Houston's really, coming back. But you guys got to remember, back in those 80s and 90s when we had down there, when Lou Duva and Georgie Benton came down with some guys you might know, Pernell Whitaker, Vander Holyfield, Vinny Pazienza, and Calvin Grove, and all those guys were at the old Height gym. And then you had HBA, which had, Roger Mayweather and Louis Burke and Savarese and the Tate brothers and the Canizales brothers and all those guys. I mean, it's, from that time on, and then, Bobby's dad opened the gym, and the reason why we're called Main Street is because, the original one that Bill Benton opened was on the corner of Main Street and Elgin, and it got called Main Street Gym from that point, and then we kept the name. We moved later to over on Clay, and that gym burnt down in 1999, and then we moved to the building that we're at now, and we've been there, so I don't know, 23, 24 years, but that's why, a lot of people ask, why is it called Main Street when it's on such and such street? That's why, so we've actually, God's been bringing top end fighters down there for camps for a long time. And listen, that was a blessing for me and Bob and Jack and the other guys that came out of that group that ended up becoming trainers, is because we had some of the best trainers and the best fighters that you could ever be around when we were young guys coming up in the game. Bobby's dad, I mean, we were around great trainers, Don Turner, Tommy Brooks, all those guys, Pi, and then so many, I mean, our gym alone, I think we've had over 50 world champions that's trained out of that gym. So, I mean, we even though we didn't realize we were going to be trainers when we were younger, we definitely were able to pick up a lot of that, how things are supposed to be done.
Yeah, and you said, you had a love for the sport. You got involved in boxing, you said, did you ever think that you'd be working with all these world champions at this high level with all these fighters? I mean, did that you pitch yourself sometimes like, I'm really doing this? Like, we're in world champion $1 million camps all the time. Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely times, where you just look and say, man, for one, you say, how's this my job? When you love what you do so much. And, like you said, we've been blessed to be, I've gotten to work with some of the greatest fighters in the world. I've been to, so many places and so many huge fights and around, guys that, just the top end of the sport. And I mean, it is definitely a mind blowing thing at the same, but 25 years ago, when I started out helping my coach, and, it hasn't been it definitely wasn't an overnight thing, and, we one of the things, many things that my coach taught me whenever, he said, hey, if you're going to start training guys, one of the most important things he always taught me was, hey, it's always about the fighter and not about us. And that's how we try to make most of our decisions. But also getting into the part we say, hey, how did you get into working cuts? Well, one of the other things, you remember back in the day, you probably talked to a lot of the old timers. Boxing guys did everything. There wasn't separate guys as much as there is now, where you got a strength and conditioning guy, you got a nutritionist, you got this guy, you got that guy. Back in the old day, you had a couple of boxing guys that just did, everything for the fighter. And so, I remember when I started out, my coach said, hey, if you're going to be a boxing guy, you're going to have to learn how to do everything. You're going to wrap hands, you're going to work, and I think, both Bob and I have done probably every job at least one time, that there is in the sport. We've taken the ring to get apart, put it back together, pick up guys from the airport, whatever needs to be done. And, but, the good thing about that is that when you learn the game that way, once you get to the level where you got these guys, you're supposed to be there. You're ready to be there. Just like a fighter, when a fighter really fights, it's kind of like the way, Trampler and Top Rank build guys. They get guys to a point where whenever they're getting ready to fight for that world title, that guy's really supposed to be there. He's fought a short guy, he's fought a tall guy, he's fought a left-handed guy, he's fought a pressure guy. They build guys. So when they get into that, to that big spot, they know they're supposed to be there.
I want to ask you a little about cuts, right? Because you're world renowned, like as one of the best cutmen. There's like 2 or 3 guys, you, Stitch Duran, right? Like kind of like everyone, like when someone gets a cut, they want you in their corner. So talk to me through, like you got swelling or you got a nasty cut above the eye. Kind of what's your process? How do you walk through that, and how do you close that cut up or keep that swelling down if it's swelling?
Well, the thing about cuts and again, going back to where we came from, I was very lucky when I started working cuts, to have a good safety net, even though I got lucky, I never needed it, but I had my coach, I had guys like Bobby's dad, Bill. And then once I started working, because I had some really like the guy that you mentioned, Stitch Duran, who I've known over 20 years and who helped me out a lot as a young guy coming up, Miguel Diaz, who everybody, I mean, he's,
Yep.
the godfather of Cutman. Miguel was very kind. He helped me a lot on the way up. There's a ton of great cut. Bobby, don't let him fool you. He's not just a trainer. That guy's one of the better cutmen out there, man. And ham rappers, I mean, he can do everything. Friend of mine, Mike Rodriguez, a great cut man. Mike Basil, he's probably the busiest guy out there. He's all over the place. You got Cutman Carlos, Rudy Hernandez, Daniel. There's a lot of really good cutmen out there. But I think probably the common denominator in there is, what I try to identify when a guy comes back, especially if he's cut, is the first thing I want to do is I want to clean it up and see what I'm really dealing with. Sometimes guys, when you see them out there fighting, they have a cut and they got blood everywhere and it looks terrible. And when you get them back to the corner, you clean them up a little bit and see that maybe it's not as bad as you initially thought it was. Sometimes it's worse. But over experience, you'll kind of learn how to deal with those different things. Once you see them, okay, this is this, and this is how we handle it. Swelling the same way. Swelling something I like to get ahead of instead of behind. If a guy say, a lot of guys kind of wait. If you wait until there's really a problem, then all you can do is kind of maintain that problem. If you can get in front of it a little bit, then a lot of times you can keep it from being a real issue. So, sometimes say, guy starts getting a little red, you can see he's getting hit with the same shot a few times. I'll go ahead and start icing it then and try to get in front of it instead of waiting until it becomes a big problem, And I think the other key to a cut man is, you have to be one, you don't want the fighter to read, because sometimes the damage is bad. And your job is to keep them in the fight. I mean, we've all seen some where you're like, man, this, and maybe in my mind say this is a horrible cut. You don't want to relay that to the fighter. You don't want the fighter to pick up, how seriously injured, because you're trying to keep him in the fight so he can do his job. So I think, remaining calm is one of the most important things a cut man can do.
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, because you don't want to show you want to keep a poker face. Like sometimes the cuts, he can't see it, right? He knows it's bleeding, but he can't see how deep it is or how bad it is. You have to keep him calm, or you got to keep a poker face. You can't panic even if this cut looks bad.
Correct.
Is there one or two jobs that you can remember off the top of your head? You're like, wow, I did a really good job of closing that cut up. Like, that looked bad and I got it closed pretty well. I mean, is there anything that kind of sticks out on top of your head?
We've had a few of them, but definitely there's been some. I was working with a kid a few years ago at a show out in Louisiana at one of the casinos. And a kid in the second round, he caught a headbutt, and he was an undefeated kid at the time, and he got a gash over one of his eyes that I could stick my pinky finger in. It was bad. It ended up taking, I don't know, 14, 15 stitches, and it was long and it was wide. And he came back, man, and I looked at it and I said, hey, listen, you got a little cut. Listen to your dad. His dad was his trainer. I said, listen to him. Everything's good. Don't worry. I got this. And, I worked on it a little bit, and then, the doctor was, luckily the fight before that happened at casino. I worked with that doctor, and a guy got cut up pretty bad on that one, and I shut it down. And so he said, hey, I said, just give me a couple of rounds of work on it, doc. And, if not, we'll shut it down. And, I got it stopped in a couple of rounds, and the kid ended up winning the decision. So after all that, when he went back to the dressing room, he looked in the mirror at the cut and just probably passed out in the He was like, you said it was a little cut. I said, son, if I would have told you how bad it was, the fight would have been over with. He was able to go ahead and win the 8 rounds, decision and keep his undefeated record. But I mean, it was one of the heavier cuts that I've definitely worked on, And you just never know. That's why we're there. Not too long ago, I was in California. I worked another undefeated prospects corner. He was the main event in the show, and he was in with a tough kid, and he got cut 2 times over the same eye in the second and third rounds. And same thing, shut it down. And he ended up getting the win. He had a tough fight, but he got the win. And afterward, and that's why we're there. I know a lot of times the cut guys are standing around. We're telling a lot of boxing stories, and it seems like, man, these guys don't really do anything, but we are actually there for a job at certain times, and I think a lot of guys make the mistake of, it's kind of like insurance in your car. If you knew you were going to have a wreck, of course you'd have it, right? But you're better off. Hey, if you have a wreck and you got that car and in your glove box, you're going to feel a whole lot better with it. And I've seen guys not get a cut, man, and end up getting a cut and losing a fight or, something like that. When, hey, man, listen, there's a bunch of real guys out there that know what they're doing, and get one of those guys and pay him a couple bucks and don't have to worry about it,
Yeah. Yeah, because it really is like extremely important. Because it could be a butt, it could be something that you can't even control, and next thing you know, you got this nasty cut, and yeah, now
Yeah,
it changes the fight. Yeah,
yeah, I've had guys after the fight that I knew, come and tell me, man, Arron, we've never got, or, maybe that I didn't work with and came and say, hey, can you take a look and say, man, we've never got cut before. We've had 15, 16 fights. And that's the whole thing. I've seen guys in 12-round fights where they're just beating each other half to death and there's nothing. And I've also seen guys in the first round. I've had a kid I worked with got cut over both eyes in the first round. You never really know.
So I want to get back into Main Street Gym and your relationship and you working with Bobby Benton, because you guys are doing an incredible job. You've been working with Bobby for a long time. Did you know right away, okay, this is a good fit? Like me and Bobby, like we're a good tandem. We're going to work well together, or did that take time? Or talk about how that relationship got built.
No, Bob and I worked together for so long. I mean, it's been over 20 years that, and it's just like anything in life. You know who your people are just about instantly. Like guys that like-minded guys at the same, sometimes guys just click right off. And it's been like that with me here and with Jack. And then we have a small group of guys that we work with, that we also have, Lencho Adame and Chris Hernandez, Evan, got a good little circle of guys. Bobby, I, and Jack have been working together 20 plus years, and we don't have a lot. One of the things that makes us work good is that we don't have a lot. I'll use a better term than I would normally use here, but there's not egos involved. There's not nobody's, hey, it's this, that, I'm doing this, that. We have, when it goes back to, like I said, what my coach Walt taught me a long time ago, which is about the fighter. And all of us, our main goal is we don't care whose name is on the, hey, who's the cut man, who's the head trainer, who's this and that. Hey, there's a kid looking good, is the kid going to win? The kid get the win. That's what our concern is with every fight, every camp, with every fighter we work with. That's what our main concern is.
And you guys have done a lot of winning, and you can see that the relationship is really working, and there's a good bond. It's really good, Jim. I want to get into Regis, because I think Regis is one of the top 4 or 5 fighters in the world. I think he has been avoided more than anyone I can think of in recent memory. Maybe Lara is the other guy who gets avoided as much as Prograis. But I want to start with him, right? Because he came up and he won a lot on Showbox. He got big wins over Joel Diaz. He's got some big wins. Working with him, did you know that he was special right away, or was it more like a work in progress? Because like O'Shaquie came on and we all knew O'Shaquie was different. But talk about those early years and building up Regis.
Yeah, I think, and I've known Regis since he was an amateur. He was at a different gym, at Savaz when he was an amateur. And I will say what stuck out to me from the beginning with Regis, even when he was a young kid, he's always been a kid, like we would say, is with business. He's serious. He was a young guy. He was a serious guy. He wasn't a play around guy or a guy that, was trying to do all this and that. And he's one of those guys, I say, he really wants to be a fighter, if that makes sense. My coach, all these old timers always have the best saying, but my coach used to say some guys like the idea of being a fighter better than really being a fighter. Regis is definitely the opposite of that guy. I mean, like, he's got that, this is big words, but that Duran type of mentality where, I mean, he's especially, I don't know if you've ever been around Regis on a fight night, but he's a serious guy, all the time, but on fight night, he's a different guy altogether. I mean, you can see that switch flipping him, and he's there to get in that ring and get somebody out of there. That's what his whole mentality is. And he trains like that. And listen, he's not a party guy. He's not a guy out doing all this and that, even when in between fights, he stays in the gym. I mean, he's just a real guy with his business, 100%. And, and I'll say, I definitely saw that in him, from a very young age, knowing him.
I want to just go over a couple, go over his career a little bit. He got off 2016. He blows out Aaron Herrera in Oklahoma in the casinos, the Buffalo Run Casino in the first round. 2017, he blows out Joel Diaz on a Lou DiBella card in upstate New York. And he's blowing everyone out 1 round, 2 rounds. I mean, just dismantling people. And then that sets up the 2018 fight with Ndongo. Ndongo was a former unified 140-pound champ, and this was really his coming out party. I know a lot of people that didn't know what Prograis was all about. They said, "Oh, Ndongo's going to win this fight." Ndongo didn't win that fight. He got knocked down, I think, 4 times.
Yeah. Yeah, he may have did a cartwheel or him or Diaz. But I believe if I'm correct, even in Diaz fight, I think we were the dog in that fight. I think that was. I think we were still the quote the beast or I think Diaz was the favorite in that fight, and he went through Diaz, and like you said, he went through Ndongo just about as quick, so, if not quicker.
When you go through Ndongo, right? Because Ndongo is, like I said, former unified 140-pound champ. Like he lost to Crawford, but big deal, right? Like, so you destroy Ndongo. He gets one of the most violent knockdowns I've ever seen. Ndongo gets up from it somehow, and then Prograis finishes him. But it was one of the he hit him so hard, like he said, he did a cartwheel.
He should have. They should have stopped it actually.
When he gets through that fight, he destroys Ndongo, knocks him down 4 times. At that point, that's 2018. No one really wants to fight him. Now they really don't want to fight him. What's going on in camp there? I mean, are you confident you can get one of the top names, or what's going on in camp right there when you got the special fighter, but no one wants to fight him?
Yeah, and I mean, and that was part of the problem, and it really still is with Regis. If you know what's going on now is that even then, with all that, and we earned our spot to be there, and then we still couldn't get, we still had trouble, finding the fights that we really win. And make no bones about it. Listen, everybody needs money. Everybody needs to pay their bills. But Regis is definitely one of those guys that he really wants to fight those guys. I'm telling you, behind the scenes, when, listen, he'll fight any of these guys out there that you hear all this talk about. He really wants to fight all those guys. It's just the same and I know you're going to get to this fight, but like when we went over to fight Taylor, we didn't have to do that fight. We had an out with what the World Boxing Super Series doing when he beat Relic, knocked out Rare, stopped Relic for the WBA title. I'll give you the short version, but we didn't have to go overseas to fight Taylor. We could have got out and went and fought some whoever guy for the same amount of money. Regis wanted to do that fight because he said, "Hey, they said he's the best guy. I think I'm the best guy. This is what I want to do." And there was definitely other fights out there that we could have done probably for the same pay,
I wanted to, I got to talk to Regis. He was at it was the other 140-pound unification fight. It was when Hooker fought Ramirez in Dallas.
Yeah.
And I was backstage, and I bumped into Regis, and I asked him, because that fight, the Taylor fight, was in negotiations at that point, right? And I said, "Are you going to go over to the UK and fight him?" And he said, "I'll fight him anyway." I kind of looked at him like, "You better knock him out, because I don't think they're going to give you a decision over there," right?
Yeah.
So you go in.
And that was correct, yeah.
You go in.
And listen, that being said, I thought that was a hell of a fight, being there ringside. I think if the same fight happens punch for punch anywhere else, we probably win it the same way. But listen, no bones about it. It was a good fight between the two, definitely the two top guys. At 140, and we knew. And listen, we've never made any excuse because Bobby and I knew going over there, we have to win this going away, or else we knew there was a chance of this happening. Listen, this guy missed a punch, 16,000 people were going crazy. I don't know if you ever been to the O2 Arena, but they have a lively crowd over there. And so, it's probably holds about the same as the Grand Garden does. And, listen, no matter what this kid was doing, they were making plenty of noise for him, so.
It was a great fight, right? And everyone kind of had the same takeaway. Great fight, amazing fight. Prograis wins a close fight. The judges, 2 of them have it close. The third judge hands it, I think, something ridiculous, like 117, 112, like just an absolute, like, Homer, ridiculous scorecard.
Yeah, man.
At the end of the 12th round, did you think he had done enough to win? And did you think he had done enough to win a decision over there? Like, what was your thoughts at the end of that 12th round?
we thought, I'll say this, we thought that we did enough to win the fight, but we also knew that it was close and we weren't sure. Listen, in boxing, I don't need to tell you this. We've all seen fights that were much wider, scoring than that, and they gave it to the other kid. I mean, there's been some,
Yeah.
some pretty horrible decisions over, the last few years. That fight was definitely a highly contested fight. We thought we did enough to win it by a couple of rounds, but that being said, exactly what you just said, Bobby, and I knew, hey, where we're at, we knew it was up to the judges. I will say this too, getting in the ring afterwards, I went up to shake the kid's hand because it was a good fight. And he definitely had much more damage on him than Reeds did, because I was standing face to face with the kid after the fight, and I know of, he's never mentioned us to run it back ever since that fight, which I think kind of speaks for itself.
It was one of those fights. It's a great fight. Like, it was a great, especially that 12th round where they stood in. Like, no one really complains, but if you go back and you ask 10 people, 9 of them think Regis won the fight. It was a great fight, and no one complains because it was a great fight. But Regis won that fight. Regis won, and
and like I said, I've always felt, and Bob and I've always felt, like I said, if it happened somewhere else, we probably win the same way. In a close fight, but we get the W. But listen, it was a hats off, and I like Regis did what real fighters should do. Is afterwards there was no excuses, no, hey, I had a rock in my shoe, or didn't eat for the last 2 weeks, or I stayed up all that, whatever these guys come up with these days. He just said, hey man, it's a great fight, it's a better man tonight, let's do it again, which we obviously still haven't got the chance to, so hopefully one day that'll still be an opportunity for us,
Is that a fight you guys want again? Because I want to get into his second world title, because still, even after the loss, no one wants to fight Regis. Lou DiBella said he couldn't, no one would call him, right? Like, still, no one wanted to, even after the controversial loss, no one wanted to fight him. And he got a couple of wins. Like, he beat Red Cash, right? Like, he got Tyrone McKenna. Got a couple wins, and he finally gets a shot with Zepeda. And again, good fight. Zepeda is game, and eventually, I think it's 10th round stoppage, right?
11th, maybe 10th or 11th. Yeah.
Regis finally gets him out in a really good fight, and okay, now everyone remembers exactly how good Regis is, right?
Yeah. I think because one thing, you and I, just like, and we'll get to this in a little bit with Ray Vargas with Shock. Neither one of those guys had a cherry pick on their title fights. I mean, Zepeda was a universally recognized, like we would all say in boxing, that's a real guy. That guy can really fight. He's another guy highly avoided. Me personally, I thought the fight with Ramirez, I thought he won. That was another kind of close fight, but when the way I saw it, I thought he beat Ramirez. Now, same thing. Ramirez was in his home arena and so on and so forth, and he's the house guy. But I know a lot of guys that watched that fight that thought Zepeda did enough to beat that fight, and then to beat him, and then he came out and just rolled Vargas and a bunch of other guys, and so he was a universally recognized real. He earned his number one spot, and he's a really real guy. And that being said, the way Regis got him out of there, I mean, I think it kind of speaks for itself,
Yeah, that was, like I said, that was a masterclass performance against a really good fighter, maybe the second or third best 140 in the world. And again, he was tough, but Regis was clearly the better fighter. And then he closed the show with a stoppage the way you want him to. And
correct.
I really hope Regis.
In his backyard, too. I mean, we went to Southern California and fought him,
Regis, really, from a skill level and from what he's done in the ring, he's a top 4 or 5 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. I've always said that, and it's just he doesn't have the record yet because no one's wanted to step in with them. Ramirez, right, avoided that fight. Like, that's – I mean, it's
5 years.
There's no other word for that. Ramirez ducked him, right? I mean, it is what I know. Ramirez,
I mean, look,
him.
They can say whatever they want, and listen, listen, he's got a great camp around him, and I remember watching him in the amateurs up in Colorado Springs that long, when he won the U.S. championships, and I said, hey, this kid's really good. That being said, that was what they did here being a mandatory, and they just dodged it. That's all there is to it. I mean, there was never, you can't say, it's like if I ask you if I want to buy that painting behind you and you say, nah, Aaron, that's not enough money. I haven't even given you a number yet. So there was never a dollar amount made for it not to be enough. They just right off said that's not enough, but there was never a number attached to it. How can you say it's not enough? So and then our second mandatory, because the way the WBC ordered it, the winner of Zapata and Regis was supposed to fight Ramirez. He was the number one, and that was Reed. And then the winner of that fight was supposed to fight the winner of Sandor Martin and Teofimo Lopez, who we know was Teofimo. And neither one of those. So we had a mandatory and a guy right after that, and neither one of those guys would agree to fight him, and they both used the same excuse, but in both cases there was never a dollar amount attached to that. So you can't say it's not enough if a number hasn't been put out there yet.
I got to talk to Bobby, I guess it was November, December. It was when Austin Trout was fighting in the Rio Grande Valley, and I asked him about the Ramirez fight, and he just looked at me and said, Ramirez is not taking that fight.
Yeah.
I was like, why wouldn't it's a big fight for a world title? Why wouldn't Ramirez take it? But I was like, he's not taking it. I was like, and then Ramirez didn't take the fight. Funny
that you say it too, because, and I'm not going to put any names out there because we all know all the guys, and there's no need to. But after the Zapata fight, when we got back to the hotel, and there was a bunch of guys in the lobby getting something to eat and so on and so forth, and there was a bunch of boxing guys there, and a lot of them are heavy guys, been around a long time, and they're up there, and we got to talking about it, and they said, Aaron, do you think Ramirez is going to fight? And this is, like an hour after the fight. They said, you think Ramirez is going to fight Reed? I said, I hope so. And they said, we don't think he is. And I said, I don't think he is either, but I hope he does. and it's crazy that conversation happened, like I said, maybe an hour or so after the fight at the hotel. And, funny there is that all the guys were right, so, everybody called it almost immediately. And, little that's how it turned out to be, So, with both our mandatories doing other things, Ramirez is fighting Coleman, which is, I'll let everybody figure that out for themselves.
I want to ask you about that. Can we talk about that? He's fighting a 135-pounder, Coleman. And I like Coleman.
Really, maybe a 30-pounder, right? He probably had his best. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now Coleman is fighting, like, if he would have gotten Ramirez, or if Ramirez would have got Tio or Josh Taylor, you could say, okay, maybe that's
correct.
He's fighting Richard Coleman. There's not more money in Coleman, so it's not about money, right? Because
absolutely. Well, I'll make it real easy for everybody out there. Put the shoe on the other foot. What if Regis would have picked Coleman for his next fight? What would everybody be saying? We're cherry pick. We're riding the tide, or we're doing whatever. We'd be getting tore apart. All over the internet. If we had picked a fight that similar, Kim or another guy of that, same type of level, and so, and like you said, at least with Teofimo, he's fighting Taylor, and so. But a lot of that's because we know, Top Rank's the OGs of the game. They're going to keep everything in house, and I understand. But you would have thought, especially with Ramirez, that being his time, being the number one guy, you think, hey man, what real fighter in this game doesn't want to fight for the title again, especially if you've had it already? That's been Regis's whole mission since he lost the decision to Taylor. Was, hey, I'm getting my belts back. I'm not leaving 140 till I get my belt. That's been his whole thing, and he made that happen. And you would think that these other guys would want to be the same way.
You would think so, right? But like I said, Regis has been avoided like the plague his entire career, and early in his career, before he got to a world title, you could see why you wouldn't, if you had a young fighter or an aging champ, maybe don't put him in the ring with Regis. I knew a fighter on the come up who was getting into contention at 140, and his trainer asked me which belt would you gun at. I was like, I wouldn't go for Regis. Like, I would avoid Regis, right? Like, just because you're not going to beat Regis, right? I'll tell you off air who that was, but like, go look at one of the other belts because Regis
Yeah.
is the best guy in the weight class.
And he's a tough fight no matter what. I mean, when you look at it, if you look at the guys, before and after they fought Reed, they're different guys, and so I mean, you're looking at a rough physical fight with a guy that really wants to fight in there with you that is coming to fight, and so I mean, I don't think anybody out there is going to take that fight unless it's very, very beneficial to them in every way. And listen, and I'll say this too, man, for the guys out there. You hear a lot of this talk on the internet, social media, these guys talking this and that, but behind the scenes, we've had zero offers from these guys as far as, this guy, now all of a sudden everybody wants to, suppose they're going to fight Regis and Regis's name is in a lot of guys' mouth. But as far as any legitimate offers, so, a lot of these guys I think are doing a lot of talking and, definitely Regis a hot name to mention out there. It happens with a lot of guys, right? Everybody's going to fight Canelo. Everybody's going to fight Reed. Everybody's going to fight this guy, that, there's certain guys in the game that, everybody likes to mention their names because it helps them. But, the reality of it is none of these guys are making, any kind of legitimate play to really fight Regis.
So I want to ask you, if you and Bobby could wave a magic wand and make any fight you could for Regis, who would you guys want to fight? Who would you want for Regis next?
I would guess Josh Taylor, Ramirez, just because, Regis has been wanting the Ramirez fight since he fought and beat Ndongo. He's wanted to fight that long. And so, I mean, he's always wanted that fight. And we've never got it. So, and, I would say that would be, and then obviously Taylor, because, hey, listen, he wants to run it back. He's wanted to run it back with him since, so I guess, I would guess if we could have our choice, it'd be one of those two guys, if not both of them, We like the Teofimo fight a lot too. It's just nothing materialized on it.
I want to get to your second world champion, because this is a great story. O'Shaquie Foster, world class amateur, like sensational amateur. You could see the skills and the athleticism. You could tell right away that was a special fighter. Talk about the early stages and the development of your other world champion, O'Shaquie Foster, because it's a great story.
Well, with Shock, I go back with them. I've known Shock since he was probably 8 or 9 years old. I got involved with him when he was in, I don't know, maybe 12, 13, giving his guys, the guys that were his original trainers out there in the Orange, Beaumont area. And then I really had him when I took him to the PAL tournament. When he was little, he had just turned 17, and he brought this up to me. And when we were in camp, and it's not that I forgot it, but sometimes you don't think about certain things, all the time. And he said, "Hey, Cole, we went in 2010 to the national PAL tournament, and he was only maybe 17 a couple of weeks. He had just turned old enough to be in the open, men's class." And but he was already, like you said, a well-known guy. He won several national titles, and everybody knew who he was in the amateurs. But we went to San Antonio in 2010, went to the PAL tournament, which that year was a qualifier for the trials. And his first senior open tournament, and he fought 5 times, and he won. And then in the finals, we fought the number 1 guy, who's a really good fighter, and a fighter I'm worked cuts for before. I'm working cuts for in a couple of weeks. Really good amateur, and that got him to the Olympic trials. And so, he was saying, "Coach, here we are 13 years later. We made a full circle. We're back in the same city, same place, and, fighting, and then won the world titles." I will say this, even for everything that we've done, that was a great, taking that whole ride like that it was nice to see it. And because it wasn't an easy road for him, if anybody knows any of Shock's story, he had a lot of bumps in the road, man, and a lot of times it could have went sideways, and a lot of adversity that he had to overcome as a not just as a fighter, but as a man, outside of the ring, to get to where he came. So, I mean, it really is. Everybody always throws these things. Oh, it's an amazing story. He truly had an amazing story, because he could have been one of those stories that we all have in boxing where we said, man, this kid could really fight, but this happened or this happened. Like we've all got those stories for a lot of guys, and it turned out the opposite.
I want to ask you about that, right? Because really touted amateur, really touted prospect. He's fighting on big cards early in his career. Then, he gets those 2 losses on both on Showbox, I think, right? The Samuel Tay and then
correct.
Yeah,
Chinea.
Chinea. What's going on after that second loss, right? Like, I mean, what's his mindset? Is he done with boxing? You got to talk him back in the ring, or is he fine? After that Chinea loss, what's his what's his mental state?
I'll say this because the Chanela, because he left, I'm giving you the very short version, but he left the gym and went back to and was up on the East Coast for a little while. He was signed with a promoter at the time, and they took him up there. So I wasn't with him. I was with him his pro debut and through most of the fights, but then he left for a couple of fights, and one of them was when he had the loss at Chinea.
Okay.
And also too, and not take nothing away from those guys, but if you watch the fight with Sam Tia and with Chinea, and I'm sure Shaka's run about 10-20% of himself in that, mentally at least in those fights, and he still almost mess around and won the fights. He even running at a low rate of his ability, and so I'm not sure, exactly what was going on with him after the second loss because I wasn't there. But I know Shock, and I'm guessing, that he went to a pretty bad place. And I know he kind of just felt like, hey, and like you said, because that story has been a lot in boxing, that super talented, great fighter that everybody picked to be a world champion from the time he was a young kid. And then it goes sideways. And every boxing guy's got at least one, but usually multiple versions of that story, right? We don't have them ourselves, which we do, but we've heard and seen them all. So I know he got out in the streets and he was just kind of not just not living right and not his mental state was not good and he wasn't doing anything for boxing but sometimes, as we all know too, and this will only work with the right guy, with the right man. Like they say, you got to hit rock bottom sometimes to realize where you're really supposed to be and what you really have to do as a man. And, as all men, we have to learn accountability and, things like that we know, it's not anybody else. And so I think when he had the incident where, with where he went to jail and everything, and he was sitting there and they, gave him time to, some guys do something good with that time, some guys don't. And I think he, when he came out of there, and some friends of ours helped him out, and he came to Houston and said, hey man, I'm ready to get back in the gym. I want to do it right. I know what I got to do, this and that, do what I'm supposed to do. And he had made his mind up, and we all knew, like you said, from a young age, that he's always had the ability, he's always had the talent. That was never a question. It was just a point of hearing and him just really getting focused on what he needed to do. And he did that, and he also, I watched it, he matured and grew as a man. That was the number one thing. Talent was always going to be there. I remember Gordon Hall. I know Gordon Hall from Showtime. He's the one that's been running the Showbox program, and he's a heavy hitter for Showtime boxing. But the Showbox show has been his baby from the gate. And I remember Gordon coming to me after Shock beat John Fernandez for the silver title, which was kind of one of his, kind of that turning point when he came back. I mean, when he came back, we got him some win, then he went up and beat the Alba in his backyard. But I think the big turning point when people knew, oh man, this is, turning is when he beat John Fernandez, who was an undefeated knockout artist with the WBC silver belt. He was one of the 5 boxing prospects of the year and so on and so forth. And when we came and beat him for that title, and I remember Gordon coming to me afterwards, and he said, Arron, he said, that's a totally different kid than the one we talked to in Vegas before he lost to Sam Tia. He goes, if I didn't know it was the same kid, he goes, I wouldn't even known it was the same kid. He goes, he's a totally different guy here in the way that he interviewed and the way he talked and carried himself. He goes, he's just a different guy. And that being said, when Shock, he came, Gordon came into the dressing room before we fought Ray Vargas for the title, and and had some nice things to say to Shock and to us, and and he said, hey, if you win tonight, I think you'll be the 87th guy that's been on Showbox that won world title. And and he was, but I'll give guy, much respect too for Gordon like that, because, he's been around a long time, seen a lot of guys, and, they don't have to take the time to do those things or even really to pay attention to them. But, he definitely did. And he watched the kid change, and was made a nice note of it,
So, like I said, after the second loss to Cheney, he picks up a couple wins to Alba. He gets the win over John Fernandez, and then the pandemic hits. He's out of the ring for another year, and then he gets a big spot. There's not a lot of boxing going on at this time. I think it's November of 2020. He gets the win over Roman, and he destroys Roman. You go, okay, right before the pandemic, he beats Fernandez. During the pandemic, he destroys Roman, and I'm thinking in my head, he's back. Like he's what he's supposed to be. Like he might be the best 130 pounder in the world. And then there's promotional issues and he's out of the ring again. What's going on at that point? You know, he gets a win in Dubai over an undefeated prospect. Right, he's getting more good wins, but he can't stay active. How frustrating is that when he looks like $1 million again? Like he's panning out. He looks like one of the best 130 in the world, but he just can't stay active and he can't stay busy. How frustrating is that?
And like you said, that's another, you brought up Reed, you brought up Lotta. There's other guys in the business been like that. And, part of the problem is just always like with Lotta is a good example. He's a high risk, low reward, so to speak, because everybody that really knows boxing knows, hey, man, this kid can really fight. But he doesn't have, and they say he could probably beat our guy, but he doesn't have that name that comes attached with a big check or, hey, the notoriety of, hey, he lost to such and such. He lost to such and such. Or, hey, they say, hey, why am I going to fight Shock for my minimum when if I'm going to take that hard of a fight, I can go to fight this guy and make, $5 million or whatever it is, So, that was part of it is just that, he's a dangerous fight. And he didn't have enough of a name to bring a big enough check for guys that want to take that risk with him. And, I think that was one of the biggest issues, with it. And it, like you said, with Roman's a battle tested guy. I don't care about his loss or not. I mean, he is a real guy. And I guarantee you nobody and Rudy Hernandez was a great trainer and great cut man. A good friend of mine, Mike Rodriguez, was cut man in the corner with him that night. I guarantee you, all of us boxing guys there, when he came out and dropped Roman in the first round, I guarantee you everybody would have bet their house that was never going to happen,
Yeah.
And that ring was very small that night. It was like a 16-foot ring. I mean, it was a tiny ring. And so, I know that, they say this is going to be a good ring for us. And when Shock came out, they knew we could box. They didn't know he could fight. And, and so, when he put Roman down in the first round, that was a legitimate knockdown. I think everybody knew, hey, man, this is a little bit different than he gave Fernandez a boxing lesson, but, he can fight too.
And you come full circle, you go back to San Antonio, like you said, where the trials were, and you get the world title and you just make the most of it. I mean, I had it 10-2, the judges had it wide too. You put a lesson on Ray Vargas in the Alamo Dome. So you come full circle. Like he's right where he's supposed to be, a world champion. What's that like? Like you got him, like he's done it. Like all of his trials and tribulations, like he's done it now. Like he's where he's supposed to be. He's a world champion. What's that like for you guys, having known him for so long, and what's going on emotionally for you guys when you hear "and the new"?
I mean, like you said, we knew in between, our team in the corner, we had it really wide. And, a lot of people misunderstand. I think the reason why and I hadn't got to watch it on TV until a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, I watched it when I was there. But like I was saying, well, man, at the 10th round, you were telling Shot, I said, listen, we told him to do that because, one, we knew we could. We knew we had Ray in a position where he was really just trying to, in our opinion, Ray wasn't trying to win the fight anymore by the 10th round. He was trying to get through the fight. And I think he knew he had his hands full. He knew he couldn't muscle Shock. I think Shock had hit him with enough, stuff that he knew, hey, man, if I start exchanging too much with this kid, I could get in trouble. He was getting outboxed. I mean, just everything was going wrong for him. So in me and Bobby and I's opinion going into that 10th round, we felt like, hey, listen, Ray's just trying to finish the fight. We said, let's go ahead and pick it up on him a little bit and make sure, hey, let's close this show out strong and not leave any doubt about what's happening or let him try to make it. Listen, Ray was an undefeated world champion at that time. He's great at making a judge, and he knew, even in those middle rounds, you could see he knew, hey, I'm behind. I got to do something. And he was trying to make it happen. Shock was just taking it away from him. He was moving his hands a lot in the 7 and 8, but he just wasn't landing anything. But, we said, hey, let's go ahead and push him hard. close out the show strong and make sure there's no doubt about, who's walking away with this strap. That being said, like you said, knowing the kid since he was young, so young, being with him through there and watching all that thing, I mean, obviously it was, seeing him come full circle like that, it was definitely a great moment for the entire team, but definitely well deserved by the kid and doing what we all knew he could do. He surprised everybody else, but not us.
I want to ask you the same question I asked you about Regis. 130 is a really interesting weight class. A lot of good fights at 130. Again, I know he's got mandatories. He's going to have to take mandatories and things like that. But if you could make any fight for him at 130, who would you and Bobby like to see him fight next?
We'd like to fight any of the other belt holders, any one of them. We really believe that he can, become the undisputed champ at 130. And I know the kid that just fought Tank, the Dominican King, is a really good fighter. That Bob had. But I'm assuming he's going to get a little break. But he's got one of the belts at 30. I think the other belt. I mean, we would like to fight any of the other belt holders as soon as possible, and we really think he can get there and he can clean them out. So we want to get started somewhere. So whoever's got one of those other 3 belts, that's the next fight that we want. If we could have our way.
Which you got mandatories here. You got you
correct. Yeah, I mean that. Yeah.
I want to get to we've got to your 2 current world champs. I want to get to your future world champ, Sammy Castaneda from the Rio Grande Valley, which is becoming a hotbed for boxing. A lot of good fighters coming out of the RGV right now. Sammy Castaneda from Mercedes, Texas, really good looking prospect. He's got a real interesting story too. Not too long ago, he was like 240 pounds, and he's come a long way. Talk a little bit about Sammy. He's working with Coach James Payton in the Rio Grande Valley. What's the trajectory for Sammy, and what do you think his ceiling is, and what's the plan for him?
I tell you what, one day, and you're exactly right. Sam is a super nice kid, man. He's I started working cuts for him a couple fights ago, and like I say, he's got a really good young trainer, James Payne. I see that got a good set of eyes on him, knows what he's looking at. I've listened to him in the corner, gives a good instruction. Got a good stable, young guys that he's working with, and he's doing a really good job with those guys. And you could just see it. They have a good good little chemistry about him and all the guys that they got around him. And Sammy's he's just as nice a kid as real respectful, just good, solid guy, and really wants to do a good family, everything. And I tell you what, I worked when, like you mentioned, the fight down in when Trout fought, when we were down in Hidalgo, he fought good, solid, experienced dude, got a win. And then this last one, same thing. It's not so much I think Sammy's got 8, 9 fights somewhere around there now. 10 fights. He's right in that 8 to 10 and 0 level of experience. And he's fighting these good, experienced, tough guys. But one of the things that I noticed in his last fight when we were down there in Corpus or in Robstown, you expect him to get the win with this guy, but I thought that he did some good things in that fight. You can see him making adjustments and learning how to do some things different in the ring. Work on things sometimes in the gym is one thing, but when guys are able to do them in the fights, then you can see, hey, listen, this kid looks like a different kid than he did 2-3 fights ago. That's the key to, young fighters developing, if they can do that. Some guys, you see them and they say, hey, man, 4 or 5 fights later, and we're still having the same problems, doing the same thing. They're not taking that, that learning curve the way that they're supposed to. And so I've seen Sammy in the last 2-3 fights, definitely you can see him, changing gears a little bit, changing level.
Yeah, you can see. I was able to call that fight with the legendary Kerry Daigle, and I was really impressed. There's so many gears, right? Like I the first time I ever saw Sammy was in the Texas State Golden Gloves when he fought Verge, and he came up short, but Verge was destroying everyone. Virgil Ortiz was destroying everyone, and he dropped Sammy. Sammy came back and gave him hell. He came up a little short because of the knockdown, but like. You knew there was something special about Sammy at that point. And I just want to, his progression and how much he's improved in such a short time. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, that just spoke for itself because we know, hey, listen, Virgil Ortiz, a great amateur fight, very heavy-handed kid. I think he's knocked out everybody that he's fought in the
Yeah.
pros, and I mean, he looks like he's definitely one of next world champions at 47 at some point, I would guess, and definitely a knockout artist. So the fact that that, and I wasn't at that particular state Golden Gloves, but the fact that like you said, that he dropped Sam got up and started fighting harder, I think kind of says the whole thing right there. And I think he's making good progress as a pro. I would guess, another 4 or 5 fights, step him up a little bit each fight. And I think he's ready, go to a show box, that type of level fighter. And I definitely think for one, he's got the mentality. He wants to fight and he wants to get better and he wants to do this. So that means everything. And I think as long he keeps that going, and like I say, he's got a good trainer around him, and we're planning on getting him up here, in our mix and then letting him do some camp up here and, get some good sparring. And we have a number of good guys, I mean, obviously, you mentioned a couple of them that everybody knows about, but we have a great group of young guys in the gym, bunch of undefeated, prospects we have coming up behind, our world champions and good seasoned pros and stuff that Sammy will be able to get a lot of really good work with, and he'll be able to learn a lot from inside the ring, which is where fighters really have to learn. You have the greatest trainer in the world. There's certain things that you're only going to learn from other experienced fighters inside the ring.
Sammy's in great hands. Coach James Payton, the rich boxing, background, and he's doing great things with the fighters in the Rio Grande Valley, and like you can see, when Sammy came up, like he was just a banger, right? And now you can see he's got more skills. He can fight from the pocket. He can fight from long range. Like he's really, really made Sammy a much more diverse, much more complete fighter. Like there's a lot that Sammy can do. He's just, although that nickname El Gallo Fino, that really fits Sammy perfectly, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, he's definitely developing. You can see it. He's every fight he looks a little bit different. He's learned a little bit more, and that's the correct path for a young guy like that. And like you say, he's got I actually like James. I think he's one of the the better young trainers that I think in a few years you're really going to be hearing a lot about. If you say and like you say, comes from a place where a lot of really good fighting talent comes from down there in the valley.
Certainly, and it's going to be fun to watch his maturation and see how far he can go. He's in good hands. Like I said, he's got Coach James Payton. He's in really good hands. Arron Navarro, I've gone way over. I appreciate your time. It is an honor and a privilege to get to talk to you. If there's any shout outs or any sponsors or anything, please let us know now.
Well, man, listen, I just first and foremost definitely like to thank you, for having me on. Getting a chance to talk about all the things that we love so much, and maybe getting, some of the stuff out there that, hey, I know everybody monitors the internet, but, that doesn't always tell everything. Sometimes it's good to get the guys on there and really, kind of get some more of the backstory or so on and so forth out there. So, yeah, I definitely like to, to thank you, for having me on. It was a pleasure talking. We've seen each other a million times all over the place. We rarely get to talk like this because, usually when I see you, we're all working and, we're kind of high and by it and then get back to what we're doing. So it's very, very nice to get to talk to you. You're more than welcome always to come by the gym. If you ever get down to Houston, man, come by the gym. We always got great sparring and probably a bunch of guys you'd like to talk to in there, man. So like I said,
I've been down at Main Street before. I've been there to talk to Regis and Miguel. Yeah, I've been. It's a great gym. It's a great gym.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, we got so many guys that, like you said, Miguel, and we got, Darwin Price and Edison Garcia and Eduardo Garcia and Ray Talib, just a ton of, young fighters coming up behind those, those guys that we already got going. So it's been a good program. It's going to stay one. So, man, hey, thank you so much, man, for having me on. It's a pleasure talking to you.
All right. Thank you for your time. It's an honor and a privilege. Can't wait to see you again. Coach Arron Navarro, thank you.
Thank you, brother. Have a good night.